Oh,
Oh, Lord, here we go. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, time to make America think again. Here we are at Law and Legitimacy. It's in the mind-numbing day 60-something of the United States of America versus Joe Biggs. And we are once again under seal in proceedings. And, because we're under seal, even though Mr. Biggs has a right to a speedy and public trial, and the First Amendment opens the courthouse to the world, there's an unreviewed and unreviewable decision to seal these proceedings while we discuss issues that may affect the trial. And that's all I'll say at this point. I'll report more when I can. Mr. Biggs yesterday was able to present a stipulation that we entered into with the government that there were at least 8 confidential human sources, in other words, informants, working with the FBI, reporting on the Proud Boys between the period of the general election in 2020 and January 6, 2021. And, we say at least because I'm not even sure the government knows exactly what was going on, at least the prosecution. We've had yet more disclosures last weekend that independent of FBI undercover or withdrawn, withdrawn. I feel like I'm in court. Independent of confidential human sources from the FBI, the Metropolitan Police Department, the local police department in Washington D.C., actually had undercover agents working with Antifa, walking with and marching with and observing Antifa and Black Lives Matter. I had an interesting conversation with someone this week. They were talking about the potential for violence associated with this case, depending on the outcome. And I said, I am worried. If we get an acquittal, I wouldn't be surprised to see Antifa do something. And this person said, have you ever seen concrete evidence that Antifa actually exists? This person's political sympathies, I think, are a little bit left of center. And I'm like, evidence? Yes. Just today, I interviewed 2 undercover operatives from the Metropolitan Police Department who work on making sure that Antifa doesn't get out of control in D.C. Things like this have been known to happen. They've had mostly peaceful barbecues, aka arsons, for which they were never prosecuted. But I digress. So the Donald yesterday, more or less as predicted, Judge Juan Merchan was too smart to take the bait on a gag order. And so Alvin Bragg did ask for one. And the court declined to impose one. He made some passing reference at the close of the proceedings, urging the president, the former president, not to incite violence. And so is that a gag order? I don't think so. It's already unlawful to incite violence. Incitement means that you engage in speech or conduct that poses an imminent threat of violence or the risk of violence to some person or third parties. Now, there is a gray zone, between what is prohibited incitement and what is permitted speech. And it may be that Merchan eventually tiptoes his way up to the area up to the line of a gag order. But for now, he made the right choice. He did not seek to restrict Trump's speech. I think many expected that he would try. I think that the law favors Donald Trump in this instance, and so I was relieved to see that Merchan didn't do it. Not surprised. He's a smart cookie and a shrewd legal tactician. Maybe a little disappointed because I thought this would be the perfect fact pattern to take a test case up to the United States Supreme Court on whether trial participants, that is, those accused of crimes, rather than their lawyers, could be subject to a prior restraint during the pendency of criminal proceedings. But this fight is far from over. We now, and I suspect the gag order will be revisited because Donald Trump just can't keep his mouth shut. If Donald Trump were an outfielder and idle gossip and accusations were balls hitting balls hit in the air past the infield, nothing would ever land because his mouth is constantly. So we now know a little bit more about the 34 felonies, falsification of business records as predicted. I mean, all according to the indictment and summary, all related to efforts to cover up the hush payments to Stormy Daniels, another woman whose name escapes me, and a related payment to someone for a child allegedly sired out of wedlock by Trump. I haven't studied the evidence. Obviously, Alvin Bragg in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has. Let's see if there are any legs to those charges. The judge has ordered the parties back to court in December. I think the date is December 4th. The prosecution is suggesting that it would like to try the case sometime in the spring. The defense is suggesting they'll need a little more time. It doesn't sound like all that complicated a case to me. Yes, 34 counts. Yes, a paper trail. But I suspect, and the paper trail has to do with altering records, falsifying purposes for which payments were made, and so forth. That's a relatively simple spreadsheet exercise. Experienced trial lawyers and litigators know about the creation of a timeline. That is, you organize things in a chronological fashion and what story they tell you. There'll be 34 short stories surrounding a larger theme. Let's see. I mean, I don't know. I still believe that it's an improvident, imprudent, and unwise prosecution. I think that this sort of business, if the government's now going to say, we're going to pour through your business records if you reach a certain level of notoriety, and you're going to be subject to prosecution if those records aren't in great shape, everybody's going to be in trouble. As Freedom Lover points out, like Alex Jones, just because Trump has a voice and states his view doesn't make him wrong. I don't know about that. I don't know that it makes him right either. But I do think that when a person, achieves a certain level of fame and notoriety and draws the ire of a certain segment of a segment of the population, in these hyper-partisan times, the prosecutorial sword can be used to serve ideological purposes. And as in the Jones case, where a hoax was sold to a jury based on improvident judicial rulings, the creation of a man grown infinitely wealthy as a result of falsehoods told about Sandy Hook shootings was used to create this $1 billion fantasy judgment. That I think will be on appeal. So in the Trump case, we may well have the story of a reality stitched together by smoke and mirrors. And let's see what the judicial process says.
Thinking Man asks, I can't remember, why didn't Trump pursue Hillary?
Pursue her meaning
that he promised during his campaign in the 2016 election to prosecute her.
I think that it's easy to talk about. I'm going to get this one, I'm going to get that one, but the Justice Department isn't a private law firm. The president can't call up and say, "Hey, prosecute my adversaries. I'm having a bad hair day." The Justice Department is a slow-moving ship with one admiral in the form of the Attorney General, but lots of subalterns, lots of officers, heavily regulated, lots of internal procedures, and the decision to prosecute a public figure by the federal government must be approved internally. And if there is a scent of a mixed motive, a scent of something done for political purposes, a scent that prosecution might undermine confidence in American institutions, the feds will typically pass, which is what makes, frankly, the Jack Smith investigation of Trump over the Mar-a-Lago documents, Trump's conduct on January 6th, and other events so unusual and potentially troubling. Because, right, a special prosecutor has been appointed. The Justice Department is actively engaged in an investigation of Trump. I can say this because I'm in the very courthouse in which that grand jury is seated, and there are lots of cameras out in front of the courthouse, depending on who's being summoned into the grand jury for the day. So I don't know, why Trump didn't go after Hillary. He didn't have a Justice Department at his beck and call to do so any more than Biden does. Now, some of you are going to cluck your tongues and say, oh, yeah, right, this is a hack job. And certainly the Donald said that last night in his speech at Mar-a-Lago, that Jack Smith was a hack, a prosecutor from hell. He may have used that expression, doing the Biden, doing the bidding of Biden. That's political. That's political sawdust thrown into the fire to generate a little bit of extra heat. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. And I'm watching with great distress the rhetoricians on Twitter. If that's not a contradiction in terms, but the people stirring the embers on Twitter, talking about how this has all become political. We're looking like a banana republic, and this is what they do in the third world. And I don't think it's quite that simple. Call me naive. But I still have fundamental faith in our institutions and institutional structure. And much though I combat the Justice Department in cases, including in the Joe Biggs case, I don't believe that they're engaged in partisan hackery, and that just because they prosecute an adversary of the current regime, that the person's has become a victim of the regime's prosecutorial discretion.
I just find myself departing from you on that.
Yeah, well,
your own naivety there, but when you look at the longer chronology of what Trump has negotiated in the last 6 to 8 years, and during his speech last night at Mar-a-Lago, he did sort of a highlight reel of the various things that he's had to endure. Two failed impeachment attempts. The P tapes, he didn't reference that, but the P tapes, right? Russia collusion, the phone call.
What are the P tapes?
There was allegations that Russia had leverage over Trump in the form
of
golden showers, right?
Right.
And so I'm just trying to retrace the history here a little bit and bring that back into proper perspective. When you look at, because we've talked about this, and I've said this 100 times, it feels like now, that there are 4 legal issues that are separate and distinct that are all simmering at the same time. And the stuff in Manhattan is the most pressing with respect to legal development and procedural timeline. But all of them are ripe. And none of them appear to me or occur to me to have any underlying legitimacy or any real prospect in a fair and impartial judicial system of the prosecuting authority to prevail on the merits. When we look at someone like Alvin Bragg in his press conference talking about how there are
Alvin, yes,
super talented prosecutors in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which I have no reason to doubt that is the truth. But I do have reason to believe that these allegations of falsification of business records, alongside what he's saying about having prosecuted hundreds of cases under these same state statutes, it leaves a lot to be desired. And so when I hear you, Norm, say that I still have fundamental faith in our institutions and the judicial system, sure. I mean, we have to play on that field, and it doesn't behoove us as practitioners to convey to clients or to the world writ large that advocating for oneself or your interests is futile. So on one hand, I understand that. And certainly it doesn't behoove anybody to believe that those are sincerely held beliefs for practitioners anywhere. But we are in unprecedented territory. The large population of the United States is they're unavailed of these sorts of investigations when it comes to classified documents, or what authority the executive has to declassify and what acts actually qualify as declassification and what the process is. It just seems really opportunistic when you pull the camera back to a 30 or 40,000 foot view and just see that all of these things are simmering coincidentally at the same time as he is attempting to run for his second term in office, right?
Let me unpack what you
already dealt with everything else.
Let me unpack what you and the Donald what you said and what the Donald said last night. Trump gave an I am the victim speech. This is Salem, I'm the new witch, and look at how they keep coming after me, and they are all of a piece in his mind, but they're not. A lot of what you just referred to in terms of Trump, the investigation of Russian collusion, the impeachment attempts, the P tapes and all this other jazz, Congress stirred that up. And the role of a congressional oversight or investigating committee is plenary. It's unchecked. And I am no blind supporter of a congressional investigating committee. I think a congressional investigating committee can do great harm, as witnessed by Joseph McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee. That's not a prosecution within the meaning of the law as I understand it. That is a political enterprise undertaken for political purposes and untethered by the rules of procedure that govern in a courtroom. Trump has faced very little legal prosecution, in my view, from the legal system in his career. This is the first case that has made it into the criminal courts in Manhattan. It does seem weak. It does seem as though coincidentally, it comes at a time that is important to his presidential prospects. And it may be that George Soros backs Alvin Bragg, but taking the game to that level and suggesting that there are unitary forces governing the world, that's playing the conspiracy theorist game. And as I've said,
so is believing that everything is so fragmented and all of these people are acting independently, and it's just a coincidence that and I want to bring up Will's comment here in his question. Will says, why couldn't a Republican district attorney charge government officials who intervened into the Hunter Biden story in 2020? The Twitter files showed that there were extensive government contacts with Twitter and most likely other major tech platforms. And that is the real issue here, Norm.
There could have been Republican prosecutions, but there
maybe, but there wasn't an impetus for that. Why? Because it lacks legitimacy. From an optics perspective, institutions need legitimacy. That is one of the words in the title of why you and I connect every single morning and connect with viewers here, is that legitimacy matters. The perception of legitimacy matters. And that is perhaps why the Republican platform continues to lose in such an embarrassing fashion all across the country, at the federal, at the state and local levels, because there are principled conservative people that don't believe that this fight has been taken to a different territory, has been subjected to different rules. And I would push back to say there are people in the comments saying that there is a unitary they. I tend to side with you, Norm, that maybe there is a unitary they, but that unitary they is probably really small as compared to how many operators there are who are inclined to do whatever is within their limited respective powers to pursue Trump.
Well, are there people who are?
So you have the big tech issue back in 2015 is what created and condensed a lot of this fabricated hatred and malignment of Donald Trump in the media. And then Donald Trump made a strategic decision to lean into that, to call things fake news, right? To apply pressure back and go on offense. And what that did is stir everything up. He didn't kowtow. He didn't step aside for an establishment candidate to take his place. He made any number of rhetorical faux pas from I guess a different perspective, but telling Hillary to her face that if he were the president, she would be in jail. All of these things. Well, the problem is the establishment and those within all of these varying offices, whether it's in the executive branch, the judicial branch as law clerks or whomever, or in the legislative branch, right? All of these various people have long believed and still believe that institutional legitimacy is within that they hold that it's in their custody. But you have millions and millions, and almost a majority of Americans, voting Americans, that see this stuff and believe exactly the opposite. And that is the tension, Norm, right? And so
there are populist impulses, there are centralizing tendencies. You and I just have a fundamental disagreement. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, much though I think George Soros would like to back, the World Economic Forum and what's his name, Klaus Schwab and company, and merge with high tech to create world government in a way that efficiently maximizes distribution of income in accordance with this group's ideals of what it is to be human. Much though I believe that to be true, and much though I believe that there is a craving for significance and a desire to push back in individuals and in local communities, and that explains a large percentage of our politics, a great degree of our politics. I do believe that. I don't believe that there is a unified force, so to speak, that's out to get Trump. I think Trump is the canary in the coal mine. I think in some inchoate, unstated way, he intuits these tensions, and he represents every man's ability to say F you to those in power and to resist it. And for that reason, I am attracted to him. But the decision to, for Alvin Bragg to prosecute him, improvident, yes. Directed from above, no, in my opinion. Jack Smith, the Mar-a-Lago investigation into classified documents, why Donald and not others, that raises troubling questions.
Right. And that's all we need to do, Norm. I think that we run the risk of alienating really loyal viewers and people who otherwise agree with us by saying that, and Freedom Lover asks it here, but I don't mean to say that you're calling conspiracy theorists, bless you. I don't mean to say that you're calling all of us conspiracy theorists, but there is a lot of charge to that. There's a connotation around conspiracy theorists. You know that. Your client, Alex Jones, has been perhaps the biggest and most visible anecdote that we can reference to say that, conspiracy theories are in a widespread fashion looked down upon by, the educated classes of America, and everything is normal and you can trust the government and all of these other things. But ultimately, every conspiracy theory that we can reference for Alex Jones, with the clear exception of Sandy Hook, appear to be more on the correct side, on the true side, on the observable side of truth, rather than some sort of weird conspiracy. But this is how bureaucracy works, right? Middle managers have there's like a morally bankrupt bureaucratic class, right, that has some unbridled sense of patriotism to the institution, to the secular nature of power, rather than an appreciation for the fundamental rights that we all assume that we are endowed with by God, and that are recognized by the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and then incorporated by the states in every state's constitution. But what we're watching here is, even if it's not coordinated and it feels convenient, one can still say, well, who other than Trump could draw out this level of corruption, even if it's not a unitary force? Who other than someone who is independently wealthy and is a power user of law firms?
If we are,
you know what I mean?
If we're alienating our viewers, then we're alienating our viewers. I'm not here to please viewers. I'm here to call balls and strikes as I see them. And I think gratuitously calling all these investigations corrupt is irresponsible. I think Bragg convened a grand jury. He presented the evidence that he could gather, and persuaded that grand jury to indict. Let's take it to a jury and see what happens. I think that there were issues in Trump's conduct in January 6th. I think there are legitimate issues in his conduct with respect to Mar-a-Lago. We've got an appointed federal prosecutor who's going to look at that, and he's going to decide what to do. I haven't followed closely enough in Georgia to know what the issue is there, other than
another phone call with
interference. Yeah, with in the Georgia election, the Secretary of State, I believe it was. Whether that amounts to probable cause to believe a crime was committed, I guess we'll find out. But I mean, I don't think that just because you're Donald Trump, or just because you're anyone, you get a pass from review. And when Trump starts whining at Mar-a-Lago about being a victim, I don't buy it. I don't think he entered the political fray. He alienated people, and those people in the Democratic Party had control of Congress and made his life hell. And he fought him back. That's politics, but corrupt.
And this is what this is what I'm saying. So Lawyer Will also says this, and I think Thinking Man agrees with that. But Lawyer Will says, I don't think Bragg, the Georgia DA, the feds, and the prior parties that instigated the Russia collusion investigation and impeachment conspired. They just have the same aim: get Trump.
Well, no, and I agree with that.
That is not a conspiracy theory. We have observable things that we can.
Okay, they have the same aim: get Trump, and they failed.
Right.
And that's
This is the
politics.
backdrop. I've got this on the screen because you and I were talking about this earlier. And by the way, I want to bring this up. We've already received 3 strikes or 3 warnings on YouTube that our channel might be stricken from the platform for 3 things in March, which one said that we were inciting violence. We don't have any specifics on that. 2 others and 2 other videos are related to election misinformation. So this is a Norm. You and
I have no idea.
But Norm, we are talking about, this is all the same conversation. That's what I'm saying. We live in this world. In this world,
I do, but I'm listening to your sense of urgency, and I just don't share it. I mean, you know, there are issues in the world, yeah, and
well, here's one.
The world's not on fire.
Well, but here is an issue, right? So this was posted yesterday, and I want to give everybody a background on the 1 million followers that Joyce Aline has. She was a federal prosecutor for 25 years, apparently, claims to be an Obama era U.S. attorney. She writes for MSNBC and NBC News, and then has her own podcast, right, and is a lawyer. She tweets yesterday at 3 p.m. that Donald Trump Jr. posted a picture of the judge's daughter on Truth Social. What does that imply to you, Norm?
Yeah, that he put a target on her back.
Right, but literally, what is that?
I just told you what it implies, that he put a target on her back.
Well, but that he also just posted a picture of the daughter, correct?
Correct.
Any functioning person would read this and say, "Oh, so he
doesn't imply that, it says it." Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, here's the truth of that. He also on Twitter, it's an effort to show the judge has a conflict. But here's the big one. This is the 3rd tweet in the thread where she finally clarifies that what Donald Trump Jr. did is repost a link to a story from Breitbart. And that story contained a header image. 1.3 million views on the 3rd.
And
there's
the
almost
story
22 million on the 1st.
And the story was that Trump, or that Mershon's daughter worked for Hillary at some point, or worked in it, right? The judge's daughter.
It was exploring the potential conflicts of the judge in the Manhattan case, and in particular his daughter's connection to the likes of Kamala Harris and the Democrat Party. Both of those things, and the judge's financial contributions to the Biden campaign. There were a number of things there that were being explored. Rather than truthfully reporting on that, the first tweet was Donald Trump Jr. posted a photo of the judge's daughter.
Okay, so it's a piece of irresponsible tweeting. I mean, is that the first thing you've seen on Twitter that's irresponsible?
This is the culture. We don't win anything as normal, average, law-abiding Americans by pretending that this, even though there isn't a unitary force of people that are conspiring to get Trump, that the culture hasn't been totally homogenized around this like secular sense of, hey, he's Hitler or whatever the hell it is. And no matter what the means are that are deployed to get him, they're justified, even if it means totally eradicating our institutional norms and delegitimizing the 200 or 300 years of credit that we've earned as a Western post-Enlightenment country. That's and I know that maybe we're on different wavelengths today, but I think that you and I typically can convene around this issue. And this to me spoke. This instance spoke to me in a way that I can't even really articulate here. It's infuriating to think that 20 times the reach, and we're talking in terms of millions of views, is the difference between the truth that she posted, as a 3rd tweet down, and the first one that Donald Trump Jr. posted a picture of the judge's daughter on Truth Social.
All right. Well, so I mean, I agree. I just don't share the sense that the West is about to collapse as a result of this, or the urgency. And I want to respond to something that Freedom Lover said, because this whole thing has just, to my mind, represented the toxic nature of partisanship right now. So if we believe different than you, Norm, are we conspiracy theorists? No, stop playing the blame game. I mean, I'm just looking at events that occur in the world and trying to make sense of them and trying to avoid an us versus them mentality the moment I feel uncomfortable. I'm trying not to ascribe causation to correlation and trying to understand what it is to live in a world with a seemingly infinite number of data points, and trying to avoid being pushed into a corner or fed a line that I'm required to bite whenever I feel uncomfortable. It takes a certain amount of intellectual fortitude to look into the face of ambiguity and say, maybe what the hell's going on here? What the hell's going on here? You know, the coward's way out, in my view, is the conspiracy theorist's way out, and that is to ascribe correlation to causation, take a side, and then become the very problem that you're investigating. So I think, you know, Trump remained, and so freedom lover, you know, if that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel. Love you, but what am I going to do? I'm not here to please you.
I think that here's the downside to that sort of thinking. It implies a certain level of helplessness, and we are people watching this wherever you are, where you're coming. You know, we're streaming all over the place. Who knows who we're reaching, when we're reaching them, how we're reaching them, and to what degree we really appeal. But we're not helpless. We're not powerless. Right? We're not victims. And so I do,
No.
Norm, I think to your point, I agree 1,000% with that. It just doesn't help to pretend as though because we're going to talk about the Harvard case when that SCOTUS decision comes down, the UNC case when that SCOTUS decision.
No, there are ideological forces in the world, but I think, you know, right. But I mean,
but what does Trump represent that makes him, it can't just be that he's an asshole. Pardon my French. It can't just be that he's ostentatious and brash and whatever the hell else it is.
Whatever he represents, he's not a hapless victim. And this isn't happening to him because of his victimhood. I mean, let's be real.
But it is happening. And that's the point, right?
What is the it that is happening? A number of things are happening on multiple fronts. He's under investigation. He is a polarizing public figure. Deal with it.
Right. Well, okay. Let's keep going a little bit with what happens after this. So let's say, what happens if Trump is found guilty of any one or more of the 34 felony charges for falsification of business records? What does that mean, Norm? Are you content to say that it's just one man who is a former president, you know, candidate for an election, you know, and, you know, the justice system worked? Is that...
I don't think the justice system is a car that works or doesn't work. It's an institution that deals with allegations that people raise. It brings ordinary citizens in to evaluate cases, and people are found guilty or not guilty. If there's a procedural problem in the case, they take an appeal. If the problem is significant enough, they get a new trial. If the prosecution decides to stand down, they don't get tried again. That's the world I live in. I live in a world of concrete bells and whistles with ordinary people facing conflicts draped in legal doctrines that get manipulated, yes, certainly by people in power. But the politicization of every political or criminal justice or investigation done by the criminal justice system, because it's a public figure, and the weaponization of discretion because the person is a public figure, I just resist that. Now, what does it mean if Trump gets convicted? I don't know that he should be prosecuted here. I'm going to take a careful look at the indictment. And I do believe that there were political reasons for prosecuting Trump. And it may be that those reasons are sufficient to undo the prosecution. And it may be that we want to have jury nullification so that ordinary jurors can say of prosecutors, you abused your discretion.
You got right to where I was hoping you would go. And that was the question I was going to follow up with.
But, you know, I just don't buy the fact that Donald's a victim. I do think that he's polarizing. I think he represents to a lot of people a counterweight against a real weight in the world. But I'm trying to avoid getting sucked up on either side of the narrative. And so as a practicing lawyer who packs my briefcase every day and does the best I can with what I'm working with, I think that's the life most of us live. I don't think most of us are sucked into the ideological drama, and for 99.9% of the world, as I can't remember who said it, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. We don't get big political narratives and drama to come to our rescue when we deal with life's ordinary difficulties. So I'm not interested in Donald Trump as a victim. I'm not interested in a narrative that says these four events are connected in some deeper structure that makes intelligible sense. Do they reflect cultural norms? Do they reflect real forces in the world? Yes, but I don't think those are forces that serve ordinary people, and I want to redirect the discussion.
Well, but I think where I am, because I'm obviously very young in my life and in my professional career, and I have a lot that I can take from you, Norm, on that
Well, I don't know
perspective.
about
I want to
that,
make
but
sure that no, that it's 100% true, and I want to make sure that anybody watching understands that I believe that to my core. That I'm not here to argue with Norm for the
well,
sake
you
of
can.
no. I'm just for the
I mean, you've made a far
doing
more
it.
passionate and arguably coherent argument than I have. I just have my today. You've made you. I am suspicious of the argument because it strikes me as too ideologically driven to serve the reality that I live in.
But politics is downstream from ideology, right? Politics is downstream from culture. That's a widespread,
Which is why we need to remake our politics. The
correct.
politics
And so
doesn't serve.
well, it's not necessarily that we need to remake politics; is that we need to reassert the value of the cultural institutions that we have built for the last 150, 200 years, right? That's ultimately what we're talking about. The average person that goes into a bureaucratic position in an administrative or regulatory agency, or someone who's a staff attorney within a district attorney's office or wherever it is, right? Those are the same people that you're talking about that are leading quiet lives every single day. And they're doing whatever the minimum viable product is to make sure that they could do it again tomorrow and the day after that, and that their life is stable. So what I'm saying is that culture has shifted such that the ideology that is dominant in today's day and age and in our institutions is corrosive, and it will, as a logical extreme, destroy the tenets upon which those institutions were built if we do not return to a basic sense and a fundamental understanding of the founding documents of our country.
Arguably, I don't know. I'm not sure where Donald Trump fits in all this. But look, I have to go back to my ordinary life of objections and being overruled. So, thanks for listening, folks. I'm not sure where we were today. I'm not sure it matters.
Well, you can find us here tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow. I did say, I think I put up here that we wanted to talk about what's going on in North Carolina's legislature. Very interesting stuff there. We still need to discuss what's going on with ChatGPT and Jonathan Turley. I think that the North Carolina legislature development, Norm, will be something of a silver lining or a counterweight to today's conversation. So I look forward to getting into that. So if anybody out there is interested in looking that up, you can look up Trisha Cotham, I think, representative out of Charlotte, who has announced that she will be changing her party affiliation from Democrat to Republican. And one might ask why that is relevant. Well, that's because it would confer to the Republicans in North Carolina's legislature a supermajority, a veto-proof supermajority. And there are a number of really important things on the ballot forthcoming. So I look forward to talking about that with you tomorrow. Norm, I love you all the same. Thank you for indulging my passion this morning, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
We will.
All right. Bye.
Bye.